Welcome to the Western Wisconsin Journal. My name is Mary Claire Olson Potter. I want to remind you to get out and vote on Tuesday, April 6th at the Village Hall. Let's meet our next candidate, Gary Hines. Please tell us about yourself, your background, and your qualifications.
Thanks for the question. I've lived in North Hudson for 41 years, I guess. My wife and I and family moved here. We had our kids the year we moved here, 1980. And we moved here because we sort of fell in love with the community, like a lot of people do. Actually, I came here for a job opportunity and just after I had finished my graduate school. And it was in June. We drove around Hudson. I was certain I would get the job because I recently, gotten my PhD, and I figured I was well qualified, and I thought the interview went wonderful. So we went home certain that we'd get the job. And in the meantime, looked around at houses and went ahead and bought a house. And then I didn't get the job. It was director of social services. I learned later that they sort of were going through the motions and they had an internal candidate, but it turned out all for the best. We moved here anyway. I managed to get a job in the Twin Cities, and I as a trainer of a federal program training counselors. And I did that for about 10 years. It was a job that traveled in a 6-state area for the Region 5 Rehabilitation Services Administration, RSA, out of Washington. And I did that for 10 years. Enjoyed it a lot and learned a lot in the process. And at the end of that, I moved down my second career, really, was I got lined up with a medical equipment company. And essentially as a sales and training kind of person using my background. And I did that for another 10 years. And that was Jackson Medical in St. Paul. And I enjoyed that a lot as well. I really retired from there. That would have been in 1996, I guess. And following that retirement, I took a job as a consultant for another medical equipment company called Lifeway Mobility, and that company out of Boston, but it had a Minneapolis office, and I worked for them, doing kind of similar work without getting into a lot of detail, but as a consultant, but pretty full time for another 10 years. That brings me essentially to the present. I now am kind of officially retired. I'm 75 of age, and my kids are all grown up. I'm always very proud to say all 3 of my daughters have their doctorates, so I throw that into every conversation, take full credit. And so my wife and I are kind of happily retired here in North Hudson.
Okay, thank you. Here's our next question. Why are you interested in serving on the North Hudson Village Board?
Well, I've been on the zoning board for probably 20 years, rough guess, for the village. And I've enjoyed that activity and participating that way. I hadn't really thought about the board itself. I've had some interaction, of course, through the Board of Zoning Appeals. But one of my close neighbors and good friend of mine, who was the city attorney for the city of Hudson for many, many years, Bill Radosevich, came by and suggested to me that there was going to be an opening on the village board, and he really felt that I should do that. I'd never given it a thought, but on his suggestion, and a guy I respect a lot, I said, I'll check into it. So I went up and talked to at the front desk. Is it Melissa? Do I remember that right? I'm sorry, the front desk person, and got an application and submitted it, I guess, a couple months ago.
Okay, thank you very much. And our third question, what do you see is the most important issue facing the village in the next 2 years and beyond?
Well, I think whatever we can do to preserve the sort of the uniqueness of North Hudson as a sort of a special village. It is in an absolutely gorgeous setting. I feel blessed that I live down on the Malibu, which is just absolutely beautiful. But the whole village is a friendly, picturesque, interesting little settlement that has a ton of history and really is quite unique from its sort of its parent city of Hudson. Um, I think that as far as what can the board do, I'd like to see more participation for one thing on the part of the residents. I've often been the only resident at a meeting, or it's very sparse in its participation. So I'd like to see some kind of outreach that would gain us a better participation, and through that, better knowledge of, better support for, better conversation about the needs that face the village. So that's one thing I'd like to see. Um, I'd like to see that our public image is well presented. I think that we have a good website, but these days a lot can be done with that. I mean, that's a technology that's evolving so fast, and people are exploiting it in a very positive sense. And I think that that kind of opportunity that it gives us to present our face to the whole internet connected community, especially in town, is something we should make sure we're taking full advantage of. Um, I think too that through that and other means, making sure that the residents of North Hudson are aware of the resources available to them. There are all kinds of programs out there. I mean, the plethora, I'm not any expert on it, but there's a plethora of programs that it would be great if people were better aware of. And I don't know if that's a newsletter or the website or, there's all kinds of possibilities. I guess it'd be interesting. I'm not saying I know the solution. I think it would be a great topic for the board to kick around as to how can we make our residents better aware of the range of programs, as much as we can make the village residents more aware of the range of resources and programs that are already in place for them. I don't even know of all of them, but I know that at the state level, the county level, the city of Hudson, there are all kinds of interesting and useful programs that want to be sure people take advantage of, whether it's help in fixing up their home, whether it's help with taking care of their kids or their elderly parents or whatever. I think that's a role that the board could play a part in. We don't have the job. I mean, probably there's county outreach programs and all that, but I think that us having a role in making sure that our residents are kept aware and have an opportunity to be aware of the range of things that they can tap into as they may need them.
Thank you. We're going to move on to our fourth question. Do you see any areas where the village could reduce spending without reducing services?
Well, I'd have to admit I'm not real aware of the spending. So looking at how much is spent in what area and what could we not spend on, I'd have to admit I'm not very well informed. I guess for the board to review the budget and have a close look at those items and see how we really should be prioritizing them in light of the needs we see for the residents is certainly useful. But I guess I'm kind of dodging the answer as far as where I think we should perhaps be spending less. I'm very pretty well acquainted with public works. I'm pretty well acquainted with the police department, and a real admiration for the job they do. I mean, with this last snow, I mean, you could eat off my street out here. They just keep it clean right from the get-go. They so rather than get into a big praise, I mean, I think the resources that I'm familiar with are just so well implemented that I don't know of something that we're spending on that to me seems overkill or unnecessary.
Thank you. And moving on to our fifth question. Do you see any things that could be done in the next 2 years that would improve the municipal operations in the village? And a follow-up to that, what would be your ideas in how to improve these operations?
Well, again, I'm not terribly familiar with all of the village operations. I think that most of the things I do see, as I mentioned about public works and policing and so forth, seem really well placed. Um, I know that's boy, I'd be kind of stretching to look at something that seems like they should be saving money on and perhaps not needing to do. Um, I- One thing that concerns me, and it's not exactly as in part of your questions, but there are some areas of North Hudson that are a little bit leaning toward slumming, meaning that's a harsh word, but I mean where homes are kind of in ill repair and so forth, and it my guess and fairly certain of is those are probably mostly rental properties, uh, houses and apartments and duplexes and so forth. Um, I drove around one day and took a lot of pictures of things that I think um, sort of present the village in not the best light. If you're looking it over and thinking, wonder we want to live in, maybe we should live in North Hudson. If you drove on certain streets, you might feel, well, this place, there's people that aren't being kept up. What to do about that? I guess the only thing I can think is possibly some communication with landlords about areas that we think we'd like them to be attending to better. That's some leverage point that perhaps we could look at. Um, Beyond that, no, I don't know of things that I think that our operations should do better.
And thank you so much for joining us. And our final question is, are there any additional comments that you would like to make now?
I feel like I've kind of covered the territory. I'm, North Hudson's a great little town. It's a gem, and um, maybe access to the Malibu. Again, I have the great fortune of living here. It is such a it really is picturesque. Maybe we should be doing more about that as far as access to it for leisure and recreation, control of it, some consideration of whether there's too much high horsepower motorboating and water skiing and so forth on it for both from a DNR perspective and just for an aesthetics and public use perspective. Part of what I'm saying is not to let a place as beautiful, picturesque, and such a gem as North Hudson become kind of a slum on the north side of Hudson. And I think, as I said, our leverage with landlords and so forth is one place to be looking for that. I think showing off the Malibu and the beauty it represents with the Willow River coming down through here and creating through the dam this beautiful thing that the public needs to be aware of and make good use of would be something I'd be interested in just kind of looking at with people. People come down here all the time and say, I lived in Hudson a long time. I've never driven down here. This is absolutely gorgeous. And it is. And maybe we should look at that for a possibility of something we could make people more aware of.
I'd like to thank the candidates so much for joining us and remind everyone to get out and vote on Tuesday, April 6th. Thank you so much.